Welcome back to the Biblical Preaching Podcast. We've got another interview to share with you, and we will introduce that now. So, Peter, we've got Rick McKinley,
Yes.
someone that you know from Portland, Oregon, US of A.
US of A, yeah. Portland is where I studied and met my wife and lived for a few years. So, yeah, lots of connections in Portland. I'm really glad to get Rick on the podcast. Rick was the founding pastor at Imago Dei, which is a significant church in Portland. And we actually ended up graduating on the same day, sitting next to each other at Gordon Conwell. So good memories of that. But yeah, great to have Rick with us. 20 years or something of pastoring there. Now he's involved with other ministry and encouraging and helping preachers. So yeah, really good to hear from Rick. So let's go and listen to what he has to say. All right, Rick McKinley, welcome to the Biblical Preaching Podcast. Great to have you with us.
Great to be here with you, my friend.
It's been a long time since we've seen each other. Rick, I think we haven't spent that much time together, but we do have the Portland connection in common. So I think you may have moved to Portland about the time I moved to Portland. So it's kind of a similar era, but you ended up being there a lot more and doing a lot more than I did. So could you kind of give people a sense of that story, kind of, what brought you to Portland? What did you do when you got there?
Absolutely. Yeah, I became a believer when I was 19, and I was down in California, Sacramento, and then 9 months later, I was up at Multnomah University. So that was a huge shock to the system. Got married, had kids, graduated, and then went and did ministry about 4 hours away in this little rural kind of community. Came back in 2000 to start a church, and we started Imago Dei Community in Portland in 2000, and I led that for 23.5 years or something like that. And we did a leadership transition recently, and then handed it off to a new lead pastor, Chris and I, who's doing a great job. And I'm still doing work part-time there, kind of coaching and preaching and doing some of that stuff with him. And we have another congregation. So yeah, that's what got me in Portland, and I've been here ever since.
How would you describe Imago Dei as a church for people that are totally outside of the context?
Yes. Well, for one, your listeners will probably know, but Imago Dei is Latin for image of God. That was kind of, if you remember the 90s, everything was about target audience. And I thought my target audience in Portland should be everyone who has the image of God within them. But we became, I like to say I had this great vision for like what this cool young church would be, and God kind of killed that. And we really became a church that existed for the sake of the city, heavily engaged in the issues of the city with a very biblically robust theology and vision of Jesus and the kingdom. And so we were kind of, from our work, people would think we were too liberal because we're doing justice and all those sorts of things. And from the pulpit, you would think we're like too conservative. And so we were too conservative for the liberals, too liberal for the conservatives, and kind of in between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, being crucified a lot. But no, it was an honor to lead it, and God did some beautiful things. So
Portland has, I guess it has a reputation. It's not the easiest place to kind of stand as a Christian, and a lot of people kind of look to something like Portland, Oregon as whoa, that's a really tough place to do ministry, and yet you did it. You were there. How did you kind of navigate that from the inside?
Similarly to the UK, it's post-Christian, and honestly, there was very little sort of religious memory within Portland. The people who aren't believers in Portland are decidedly so, right? They're not, I just didn't ever hear. They are normally pretty like, yeah, that I'm not down with that. And so taking a lot of New Begins stuff, that missiology of place, and going, what are the redemptive windows? Where are the places that Portlanders say this is good, true, and beautiful? And we would say Scripture says that's good, true, and beautiful too, maybe for very different reasons than you think. And then where are those places like windows of opposition where Portland says this is good, true, and beautiful, and God says, actually, that's not good, true, or beautiful. And trying to navigate that as closely as and faithfully as we could. We just tried our best to be faithful, to join Jesus in displaying his kingdom, and then announce who the king was.
I'm listening to it from a British perspective, and I think often here people in church kind of have the mindset of just speak to me about Jesus, but don't speak to me about culture, don't speak to me really about anything that's going on, or let's not get kind of caught up in politics or anything like that. You don't seem to be saying ignore the issues, right? Or don't speak to them.
No. Well, we moved towards more diversity, really trying. We were very white. Portland's very white, very segregated city, the most segregated of the top 50 cities in America, in terms of like where people of color are kind of placed within the city. And as we started that work, you realize that white people don't talk about politics because for the most part it doesn't affect them. But the minute they feel like it does affect them, they start talking. And communities of color have never had the luxury of saying like, well, we just don't talk about politics, because their vision of Jesus and the kingdom and the work of redemption is about the restoration of all things, right? And that's culture. Culture is the air we breathe. So, the irony of we don't talk about culture is, but everybody's wearing similar clothes and glasses and listening to the similar music. It's all culture. So it really is, what does it look like to contextualize to that culture and speak to it not only in the language so they understand, but in a way that influences that culture.
I'm intrigued by what you said, that if you don't, I forget the exact phrase, but if you effectively preach about Jesus but there's no connection, they're not seeing how it relates, then they're going to be suspicious of him.
Yeah. And those connections, I think, are really important. And if somebody is, let's say, concerned about justice, to be able to come alongside that person and fight for justice, but to do it from the position that thing in you that knows this thing is wrong is actually, I believe, part of our design. And, you're doing it maybe from a social position. I'm doing it because I believe that these people, the people affected by whatever the thing is, they bear the image of God. They're intrinsically of great worth to God and loved by God. And that when we see injustice, something within it knows, like, that's C.S. Lewis's moral oughtness, it's not right. I don't see it clearly because I'm a self-centered, self-loving individual, but the closer I get to it, the more I see that that's wrong.
So when you have an issue like sexuality, the LGBTQ, etc. That's kind of politically charged, right? If you're not careful, what you say can sound very left wing or very right wing, and so the temptation is to just not engage it, and yet people are living in the complexity of that. And so how would you go into the pulpit, in order to shepherd the flock with that kind of an issue?
Wow, you're just going right for the jugular here. I think in Portland, obviously, that's a significant issue: sexuality and gender. The the challenge, the biggest challenge I see, is that before we get to interact with the person, they've already heard, whether it's a position paper or however we address it, that you don't like me or you think I'm wrong. However they're receiving that, right? We tried really hard to be in relationship with the LGBTQ community. There's a place called the Q Center that's sort of the community health clinic, all kinds of support and community for the LGBTQ. It was interesting. Their air conditioning went out one summer. It was just extremely warm summer, which is kind of odd for us. And I had taken a financial gift over there after the nightclub shooting in Orlando. I think it was 2016 or something. Just to say, like, we see you. We know your community's hurting. We want to help support. When they called us, their question was, could you help with a new air conditioner? And so we made 5 phone calls to 5 different churches. They didn't necessarily want to be named, but in a half hour, we raised $15,000 and bought them a new air conditioning unit to say, we see you, we know you, we love you. Some people might have issues with that, but we were trying to be good neighbors, right? From the pulpit, I think it's important that we know we have sexual minorities in our congregation. We have people who are wrestling with the LGBTQ issue, their own same-sex attractions. I have really tried to lean into groups like Revoice and others who are led by gay and lesbian people. They're the part of the church who are, and many of them are trying to live faithfully, live celibately, believe that there's a lot of joy in worshiping Jesus and that they're fighting for their faithfulness. I would rather step back and let them lead that conversation, because I actually think they're the voices we need to listen to and submit to. I also think we shouldn't elevate it, and we fought hard for that adultery, pornography, there's all kinds of sexual sins. We don't want to elevate one above the other. And so as much as possible to honor the person, give deference to those who are seeking to live faithfully to the Lord and actually elevate their voices, because I think they're the ones that should be leading this charge. Unfortunately, I don't think the church is very comfortable or willing to do that. But I do think, like David Bennett and others, that we should be submitting to them and saying, you tell us, like, how should we handle this issue? Because it's not an issue at heart, it's people, and people are really important to Jesus. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
I think
that sort of delicacy and fragility is how we handle it, because I want to honor the heart and soul of the individual and hopefully create enough enough honor that they would be willing to listen to who Jesus is.
Yeah, and that kind of honoring of the person, that's got to be kind of whole church, right? The whole church ethos, as well as the whole sermon. It's not, you can't have one but not the other, right?
Right, exactly. And it's really fascinating. And I hadn't heard about Revoice. I don't know if you've heard of it. I think it's international. Maybe it's just national, but an incredible organization that's doing really great work. And there's videos of like people who are in Revoice, as well as people who, like the pastors, who really go at that. And I remember one pastor was saying, when we took this seriously, in terms of loving and integrating sexual minorities who are fighting for faithfulness, we realize we have to talk about sin all the time, because all of us need Jesus and all of us have this propensity to sin. And it actually leveled the playing field in such a beautiful way that there was this humility in the congregation of, man, we all come to the cross in solidarity.
Yeah.
It really, like, I was like, man, I want that kind of humble dependence, you know?
So thank you, Rick. Good to hear from Rick about a whole host of things. There'll be more in another episode too. But just that final thought there of, we are all sinners. We all come before the cross. That's actually really helpful in the sense that I would imagine, and I know, that in a difficult culture where the culture is really far from what you would be comfortable with biblically, the tempting thing to do is not to ruffle feathers, not to challenge, not to say anything, just to try to find common ground and be nice. But I love that idea of actually, you're sinners, we're all sinners, we all need Jesus, let's come to the cross. There's something really powerful about that.
Yeah, and knowing what the sin or sins are, like in your area as well, kind of in your church, but in your area that you're preaching to, you're preaching the gospel to people, means that you're coming to Jesus yourself, but also you're calling people to come to Jesus. And yeah, I like how he ended there too, that as we all come to the cross sort of equally sinful, equally humble. We're not sort of like, no one's better than someone else as they come to the cross. We're all incredibly broken, and in different ways, and it looks like different ways, and some people look more broken than others, and some people can hide their brokenness better than others perhaps, but there's kind of an equalizing kind of truth of the gospel that's really helpful. And one of the things that we've been reflecting on as we were kind of watching that part of the interview back with you guys was that idea of preaching to culture, kind of preaching about politics, that there's a good section about that in your interview. And kind of typically we tend to think like John Stott has written about there being two worlds. So there's the world of the Bible. You fishing that one out? There you go, right there. We didn't plan that, I don't think, did we? But maybe you put that in there on purpose.
It's been there the whole time.
Been there the whole time. There you go. You can look back on old videos if you want to and just confirm that it's always been there. But between two worlds, really kind of famous, well-known, well-read John Stott book about it, and talking about kind of preaching is we're in the world of the Bible and we're preaching to the world, and we're kind of in between, kind of being the bridge between the two. But it seemed to be kind of like you and Rick agree with that, but that isn't quite how you were talking about it. And I know that you've kind of had things.
I would say that the between two worlds is a nice, simple model. And it's true. We do need to be expert at some level in the world of the Bible. We do need to understand the world of our listener and therefore make the bridge between them. I remember Haddon Robinson giving a lecture years ago, actually in Portland as well, just keep the Portland theme going. And he talked about that. He said, he agreed with John Stott, and there are these two worlds, but actually he said there are four that we need to deal with as preachers. So as well as the world of the Bible, he added the world of the preacher, that we've got our own inner world, we've got our own inner way of processing things, the way we see things, our baggage, if you like, which was helpful and probably not something a lot of people would have thought about, perhaps in previous generations. But then in terms of the world of the listener, he said there's the world of the culture, but there's also the world of the congregation.
Right.
And your congregation may not match the culture.
Yeah.
If you're in, like us, we're in a British church, and therefore that church is in the British culture or the English culture. But that's a very broad term, you know, and so a congregation of students in London would be very different than a rural congregation of farmers in, you know, wherever. And so there's different parts of a culture, and just because something is cutting edge cultural idea, your congregation may have no clue.
Yeah.
They may be nowhere near that.
Yeah. I mean, it's even again, maybe just it's oversimplistic, but even just, you know, talking and preaching about like a TV show as if, because because like everyone around me is watching a particular TV show right now, and I can be like, oh yeah, this is the culture, but then there's going to be many millions of people that just haven't even heard of this particular TV show that I think is amazing, and everyone as far as I'm concerned is watching. It's a slightly kind of too small an example, but yeah, you can kind of think, well, the kind of we said this in previous episodes, sort of country cultures are different within kind of the geographic kind of areas of the country, and just so it's not as simple enough to say there is the culture out there.
Yeah,
you need to know and be aware of the sort of the culture in your community.
that's right. And I think listening to Rick, you probably get a sense that even if you didn't know what Portland is like, Portland is not average.
Yeah.
Portland is often named, when people say, oh, what are the most progressive, liberal, whatever, the right label is, it tends to be Portland, San Francisco, LA, New York. There's a list of Seattle, a list of places, and Portland's right sort of at the pinnacle of that. And Rick was right in the center of that. And that's very different than where we are here, or where a lot of people are, even across the US. You can't just say, well, that's typical. It's not. It's unique. And so I think what can come with that is listening to Rick talking about ministering in that context, for some of us could feel quite uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because we're not in that context.
Yeah.
And so for us to literally cut and paste what they did might create, a massive church split or something. And so, well, hang on a minute, maybe we wouldn't quite do it that way. But it's still really helpful to listen to someone like that and say, okay, so what would that look like here?
Yeah.
What does it mean for us to love our neighbors? What does it mean for us to not just be considered aloof? Because it's easy to be a church that's like a castle in a community and no one gets in, but that's not what we're there for.
Right.
And so what does it mean for us in our community to be able to reach out, to be able to communicate, to be able to connect, and to be able to welcome people that feel so outside naturally from what we are, but genuinely to welcome, to love, to share the gospel with, to see lives transformed.
A lot of maybe even every problem or issue that we focus on in sort of the culture outside of church or the community outside of the church is likely to be in the church too. So Rick was saying about sort of in the church that like everyone has sexual struggles, sexual sin in the church. It's not just an issue. It's not just an issue for outside. There are sexual struggles inside the church, and just it's not good enough just to sort of stay aloof from the outside, because actually there's people inside the church that you need to care for, and again you said in the interview kind of we need the whole church to love people who are struggling, because we're all struggling. We're all broken, and it's knowing maybe there are particular types of brokenness in our community where we are, but that's going to be reflective. If our church is reflective of our communities, which it kind of should be, then that's good. So it's not good enough to sort of ignore everything that's going on outside as if outside is the problem and we're just going to stay inside and do nothing, because there's real people inside our churches.
That's right. And I think it's worth thinking through, how do we create that climate, that culture within the church that is genuinely warm, genuinely welcoming, genuinely loving, without just being kind of pandering.
Yeah, and not doing anything.
And doing nothing and saying nothing and never touching on difficult issues, but actually, having the courage to speak truth, but having the humility to therefore have credibility as you speak the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Because the danger is, of course, that we can pound the Bible and blast truth as we preach, but show no love, no sensitivity, no caring. And it immediately just feels like, oh, you think you're better than us.
Yeah.
You're above us. You're judging us. And so, since we know that's how people are going to react, we have to think proactively, not just be loving in that, in the conclusion at the end of that message, but have the loving tone, the humble tone, not just tone, but the reality of love and humility kind of dominating or clearly expressed consistently, and maybe for a few weeks someone hears sermons that don't touch anything controversial, but they feel loved and they feel safe and they feel there's a humility here and these people are real and they know that life is tough and they're not sitting in judgment. And then when the difficult passage comes and you preach it, it's consistent with that.
Yeah.
And so it's got to be from the pulpit, there's got to be the right tone and the right kind of framing of things. But then you need to have the church culture itself supporting that, because if everyone, is sort of sitting awkwardly and staring and, and it's just not a welcoming environment, it doesn't really matter how loving the preaching is. I think preaching sets the tone, but we've got to work behind the scenes to make sure that there's people in the church that get it and reinforce it too.
Yeah, and those three words that Rick kind of mentioned, Les Newbegin, the things that are good, true, and beautiful. Ultimately, the gospel is good, true, and beautiful.
Did you say Les Newbigin?
Leslie.
Okay, sorry, I thought you were on really close first name terms.
Yeah,
with
no,
Les.
I'll call him Mr. I guess Mr. Newbegin. So, kind of talks about that. Yeah, looking for things that are good, true, and beautiful. Like, the gospel is good, true, and beautiful.
Yeah,
but also, therefore, the gospel is not like the opposite. So it's not bad. It's not false. It's not ugly. And so part of preaching, and particularly preaching the gospel, is kind of poking or going against things that are bad, false, and ugly.
yeah,
And so it's not it's not merely a, this is beautiful, this is beautiful. Although some of us perhaps need to reflect on our preaching and talk more about good, true, and beautiful. But it's calling out things when there's a need to. But again, because from a place of we're all broken,
yeah,
and that's a statement that is also good, true, and beautiful, even though it's kind of hard to articulate or kind of sometimes believe.
yeah, and that kind of brings us back, I suppose, full circle to sort of where we started, reflecting on what Rick said, and my mind went to Romans 3, just as a sort of final thought for us, kind of classic section, Romans 3, verse 10, none is righteous, no, not one. A couple of verses later, there's a whole string of quotes there that he's basically affirming that point, that Jewish, Gentile, whatever the background, actually all of us stand in the same place before God, worthy of judgment, worthy of condemnation. Verse 12, for example, all have turned aside, together they have become worthless, no one does good, not even one. And I think we can easily affirm that and believe it, but not really hold to it. We can sort of be almost sanctified to a level of arrogance, which is literally not what sanctification should do, but to a sort of a position of, well, that's not me, I don't do that. We can start to act as if we're different and in a different category, but that's not why we're saved. That's not how God accepts us. He accepts us because we accept where we stand, and we're literally all broken, all sinners, all worthy of judgment. And like you say, that's true. And there's a beauty to that because of what then comes.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the goodness doesn't come from us. The goodness comes from Jesus. So yeah, good to ponder Romans 3 always, and good to wrestle with some of those issues that Rick's kind of shared, or maybe we felt poked by or challenged by, what does it look like in our locality, in our culture, the people we're trying to reach, as well as the people in the room within the congregation? What does it look like for us to be responsive to the gospel and to be coming to the cross together? Hope it's been helpful. It's been helpful for us. Hope it has for you. Thanks so much for joining us on the Biblical Preaching Podcast.
Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate every positive review, like, share, and comment. And thank you for praying for us. We hope you will join us again next time on the Biblical Preaching Podcast.